and tell me where you're watching from, hit that like button, and if you haven't subscribed yet, now's a good time. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this one ends. My name is Harold Doyle. I'm 61 years old. I spent 33 years fixing trucks at a diesel shop off Brook Park Road in Cleveland, Ohio, and I've been married to the same woman, Diane, since I was 27 years old. This is her story as much as it's mine, maybe more. The funeral was on a Tuesday, October 14th, at Riverside Funeral Home on Memphis Avenue. It rained that morning, the kind of thin gray rain that doesn't really fall. It just hangs in the air and gets into your coat. I stood at the front of that room in a suit I hadn't worn since our son's wedding, looking at a casket that held the only woman I had ever loved, and I kept waiting for it to feel real. It didn't. Not yet. Diane had died 9 days earlier. The paramedics called it a cardiac event. Sudden, they said. These things happen, they said, especially at 58, especially with her blood pressure history. I believed them because I had no reason not to. My wife worked for 24 years as the executive assistant to Richard Halloway, who owned Halloway Properties, one of the biggest commercial real estate firms in the city. She loved that job. She used to say Richard trusted her with things he wouldn't tell his own family, and looking back now, I understand exactly how true that was. About 40 people came to the service, neighbors, a few of Diane's old co-workers, my brother from Akron. My son Kyle sat in the front row next to his wife Vanessa, and I remember thinking how strange it was that neither of them cried. Not once. Vanessa kept checking her phone under the program, and Kyle kept leaning over to whisper something to her, low and quick, like they were coordinating something instead of grieving. At exactly 11:52 in the morning, right in the middle of the pastor's closing words, my phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. I almost didn't answer it. Then I saw the name on the screen, Richard Halloway. I stepped into the hallway, my heart already picking up speed, and when I picked up, his voice was tight and low in a way I had never heard from that man before. "Harold," he said, "I found something. You need to come to my office right now." To understand why that phone call scared me the way it did, you need to understand who Richard Halloway was. He was not a man who panicked. I'd met him maybe a dozen times over the years, at company picnics, at Diane's retirement dinner plans that never happened because she loved the job too much to leave, and every single time he was calm, polished, the kind of man who owned 3 buildings downtown and still remembered the name of the janitor's kids. Hearing that same man's voice shake on the phone told me something was very wrong. "What did you find?" I asked him, standing in that quiet hallway with organ music leaking through the door behind me. "Not on the phone," he said. "Come to my office. And Harold, listen to me carefully. Don't tell your son. Don't tell your daughter-in-law. Not yet. You could be in danger." I want to explain something about my family before I go further, because none of what happens next makes sense without it. Diane and I built a good life on a mechanic's wage and her assistant's salary. Nothing fancy, but we paid off our house on Maple Heights Boulevard, we had a decent retirement account, and we helped our son Kyle whenever he needed it, which over the last few years had become more often than I like to admit. Kyle was 32, married to Vanessa for 6 years, and the two of them had been in and out of money trouble since he lost his sales job back in 2019. They ran a small online business that never quite took off, and over the past year, they'd started coming around more. Sunday dinners turned into Wednesday visits, turned into Vanessa offering, out of nowhere, to help Diane organize her medications and paperwork, since Mom's getting older and needs help staying on top of things. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. Diane hadn't either. Looking back now, that's exactly the problem. The weeks before Diane died, something had changed in her, and I hadn't paid close enough attention. She got tired more easily. She complained about feeling foggy in the mornings, said her heart felt like it skipped sometimes, and her doctor adjusted her blood pressure medication twice, trying to sort it out. Vanessa had started coming by on Tuesdays and Fridays, always with the same excuse, to help sort Mom's pills into the weekly organizer so she wouldn't forget a dose. I remember one Friday in September, I came home early from the shop and found Vanessa alone in our kitchen with Diane's pill organizer open on the counter and Diane napping on the couch in the middle of the afternoon, which she never did. Vanessa smiled at me, said Diane was just tired from her walk, and left 10 minutes later. I didn't think anything of it. My wife trusted her daughter-in-law. I trusted my wife's judgment. 3 days before she died, Diane also asked me if I remembered signing some papers with her at the kitchen table back in July. Something about updating our power of attorney in case anything happened to either of us as we got older. I told her I didn't remember signing anything like that. She frowned, said Kyle had mentioned bringing something like that by for us to look at, and she must have just forgotten. We let it go. We had no reason not to. On the morning she died, a Sunday, I was out getting gas at the Marathon station on Ridge Road. Diane called Kyle first because I wasn't answering, and by the time I got home 11 minutes later, the paramedics were already loading her into the ambulance. She was gone before we even reached Metro Health. Cardiac arrest, they told me. Sudden, unexpected. Nobody asked a single question beyond that, and honestly, in my grief, neither did I. The day of the funeral, standing in that hallway with Richard Halloway's voice shaking in my ear, all of it came rushing back at once. The pill organizer, the paperwork I never signed, the way Kyle and Vanessa had been circling my wife for months like they were waiting on something. "Richard, tell me what's going on," I said, keeping my voice down so it wouldn't carry back into the service. "I can't explain it over the phone, Harold. Diane left something with me, a letter and a drive. She gave it to me 3 weeks ago and told me only to open it if something happened to her. And Harold, I opened it this morning after I heard the news. And what's on it? I need you to see it with your own eyes. Come straight here. Don't stop at home first. And whatever you do, don't mention this call to Kyle or Vanessa." My hands were shaking by the time I hung up. I went back into the service, sat through the final 20 minutes without hearing a single word of it, and when the pastor finished and people started filing out toward the burial site, I told Kyle I had some paperwork from Diane's insurance company I needed to sort out that afternoon, and that I'd meet everyone back at the house afterward for the gathering. Kyle barely looked up from his phone. "Sure, Dad, whatever you need." Vanessa didn't even glance my way. She was already walking toward the parking lot, heels clicking fast on the wet pavement, talking low into her phone to someone I couldn't see. I stood there for a second watching my son's wife hurry away from her mother-in-law's own funeral like she had somewhere far more important to be, and that cold feeling from the hallway settled deeper into my chest. I got into my truck, a gray 2016 Ford F-150 with 140,000 miles on it, and I drove downtown toward Halloway Properties on Euclid Avenue, with my wife's casket still fresh in the ground behind me, and no idea that the worst part of that day hadn't even happened yet. Halloway Properties took up the top 3 floors of a glass building on Euclid Avenue, downtown Cleveland, the kind of building Diane used to point at with pride every time we drove past it. I parked in the visitor garage at 12:40 in the afternoon, still in my funeral suit, my tie loosened, my mind racing through every version of what Richard could possibly need to show me. I walked through the lobby, past the security desk where a guard named 2 name tags read Pete waved me through because he recognized me from company events years back, and I headed for the elevator bank. That's when I saw a car pull into the loading zone right outside the glass doors behind me, fast, careless, angled halfway into a spot that wasn't a spot at all. It was Kyle's black Nissan Altima. I stopped walking completely. My son was supposed to be at the burial site right now, greeting the neighbors, thanking people for coming, standing where a son is supposed to stand on the day his mother goes into the ground. Instead, here he was, downtown, at his mother's employer's office building, less than 30 minutes after telling me he'd meet me back at the house. I stepped to the side, behind a pillar near the elevators, my heart hammering against my ribs, and I watched through the glass doors as Kyle got out of his car and half-jogged toward the entrance, straightening his jacket, his face tight and pale in a way I'd never seen on him before. He wasn't grieving. He looked like a man running out of time. I froze completely still behind that pillar, watching my own son walk into that lobby like he had someplace urgent to be, on the exact same day, at the exact same building, that Richard Halloway had just warned me not to bring him anywhere near. I stayed behind that pillar for what felt like a full minute, watching Kyle walk straight up to the reception desk on the ground floor, not the elevators, the front desk, and start talking fast and low to the young woman working there. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read his body, leaning forward, one hand flat on the counter, the kind of posture a man uses when he's trying to talk his way into somewhere he isn't welcome. The receptionist shook her head. Kyle said something else, more insistent this time, and she picked up the phone, clearly calling upstairs to check with someone. I used that moment to slip past them both toward the elevator, my funeral suit blending in just enough that Kyle never turned around, and I rode up to the 14th floor with my pulse still hammering in my ears. Richard was waiting for me right outside the elevator doors when they opened, his face pale, his tie already loosened like he'd been pacing. "Harold, thank God," he said, and then before I could even get a word out, he added, "Did you see him downstairs?" "That's my son," I said. "Richard, what is going on? Why is Kyle here?" Richard's jaw tightened. "Because I called your house phone by mistake this morning before I reached your cell, and Vanessa picked up. I only told her I needed to speak with you about some paperwork Diane left behind. I didn't say what, but apparently that was enough to send your son racing down here to get to it before you did." My stomach dropped straight through the floor. Get to what before I did? Richard led me down the hallway toward his office, and over his shoulder, without turning around, he said the words that changed everything. Your wife knew something was happening to her, Harold, and she made sure I'd be the one to tell you, not them. Richard's office was exactly as I remembered it from company holiday parties years ago. Dark wood, a view of Lake Erie in the distance, a desk too big for one man. He closed the door behind us, locked it, and walked to his safe behind a framed photo of the Cleveland skyline. He pulled out a plain manila envelope, Diane's handwriting across the front, for Harold only, if anything happens to me. She brought this to me 3 weeks ago, Richard said, sitting down across from me instead of behind his desk, which told me something about how seriously he was treating this. She said she didn't trust bringing it home, said if anything happened to her, I was to give it to you, and only you, in person, and to warn you to be careful about who you told. My hand shook opening it. Inside was a single folded letter in Diane's handwriting, and a small flash drive taped to the back of it. I read the letter right there in his office. In it, Diane wrote that she'd noticed money missing from our joint retirement account, small amounts at first, then larger ones, transferred out over the course of about 4 months. She wrote that she'd asked Kyle about paperwork she didn't remember signing, and he'd brushed it off, but something in his face when she pushed made her uneasy enough to start quietly checking bank statements herself, using her old login from when she managed our household accounts. She wrote that she found a power of attorney document filed with our bank, dated in July, with our signatures on it, except she never signed it, and she was fairly sure I hadn't either. She wrote that she'd started feeling strange in the mornings, around the same time Vanessa began helping organize her pills, and that she didn't want to believe what she was starting to suspect, but she wasn't willing to stay quiet about it either. There's more on the drive, Richard said quietly. Financial records, messages. Harold, I think you need to sit down for this part. Richard plugged the flash drive into his laptop and turned the screen toward me. The first folder held bank statements Diane had screenshotted herself, highlighting 4 separate transfers out of our retirement account between June and September, totaling just over $61,000, all authorized using that power of attorney document neither of us had signed. The money had gone into an account under Kyle and Vanessa's names. The second folder held photographs Diane had taken of pharmacy receipts and her prescription bottles, side by side with notes in her own handwriting comparing dosages. She'd written that the pill count in her organizer didn't match what the pharmacy had actually filled for her, that there always seemed to be extra pills of a certain kind, small white ones she didn't recognize from her regular prescriptions, mixed in with her real medication. The third folder was the one that put ice straight through my chest. It held a screenshot of a text conversation Diane had somehow found on a shared family tablet we kept in the kitchen for photos and recipes. A conversation between Vanessa and someone saved only as Danny, dated 3 weeks before Diane died. Vanessa had written, "She's getting suspicious about the account. We need to hurry this along before she says something to Harold." The reply from Danny read, "Just keep upping the dose slow. Nobody questions a heart thing at her age." I sat completely still, staring at that screen, feeling something break loose in my chest that I didn't have words for yet. Richard put a hand on my shoulder and said my wife had come to him specifically because she was afraid that if something happened to her, whoever was responsible would try to control the story before I ever saw the truth, and she wanted to make absolutely sure that didn't happen. "She protected you from beyond the grave, Harold," Richard said quietly. "Now we need to protect you for real." I asked Richard why he'd told me not to bring Kyle or Vanessa anywhere near this, and he said it plainly. If Diane's suspicions were right, and the evidence in front of us said they very likely were, then Kyle and Vanessa were capable of far more than financial theft, and if they realized I had this drive, I could be next in line, especially with a power of attorney document already sitting on file that could hand them control over everything I owned. "We need proof strong enough for police, not just suspicion," Richard said, "and we need it before they know we're looking." That afternoon, Richard called an old friend of his, a retired Cleveland police detective named Frank Delgado, who now did private investigative work. Frank met us at Richard's office within the hour, a heavy-set man in his 60s with tired eyes and a way of listening that made you feel like every word mattered. He looked through the flash drive contents twice, quiet the whole time, then finally said what none of us wanted to hear out loud. "This is enough to open an investigation," Frank said, "but it's not enough yet to guarantee a conviction. We need the pharmacy records pulled officially. We need a forensic look at that power of attorney signature. And honestly, Harold, if you're willing, a camera in your house for a short while would give us everything else we need. Because people like this, They talk when they think nobody's listening. I sat there in that office, my wife 9 days in the ground, looking at two men I barely knew, asking me to walk back into my own home and pretend everything was normal, while my son and his wife believed they'd gotten away with murder. It was the hardest thing anyone had ever asked of me. I told them yes without hesitating, because Diane had trusted me with the truth, and I wasn't about to waste it. Frank installed two small cameras in our house 2 nights later, one tucked into a smoke detector in the kitchen, one hidden inside a bookshelf clock in the living room, while Kyle and Vanessa believed I was staying at my brother's place in Akron to grieve. I moved back home the following Monday and told everyone I just needed to be around Diane's things for a while. It took 11 days. 11 days of forcing myself to sit across the dinner table from my son and his wife, nodding along to conversations about helping settle Mom's affairs, watching Vanessa bring up the house on Maple Heights Boulevard twice, asking gently when I thought I might be ready to simplify things and consider selling. Every night I went to bed feeling sick, and every morning I got up and did it again, because Frank told me the moment they felt truly safe was the moment they'd stop being careful. On the 12th day it happened. Kyle and Vanessa came by for dinner, and after I went upstairs early claiming I was tired, the kitchen camera caught them alone at the table, voices low but clear. Vanessa said word for word, "The account's fully transferred, and once he signs off on selling the house, we're done. We don't even need the POA anymore." Kyle answered, "Just don't get sloppy like you did with Mom. That pharmacist almost caught the refill pattern." Vanessa laughed, actually laughed, and said, "Nobody double-checks an old woman's heart medication, Kyle. Nobody ever does." Frank had that footage in an evidence file within the hour, combined with the pharmacy records his contact had pulled, showing an unexplained early refill pattern on a medication that could dangerously affect heart rhythm at high doses, and a forensic handwriting analysis confirming the power of attorney signatures were forged. We finally had what Frank called an airtight case. Richard looked at me across his desk that night and said quietly, "Now we bring them in the open, Harold, on our terms, not theirs." We decided to do it at the reading of Diane's will, which the family lawyer, a woman named Patricia Wynne, who had handled our estate paperwork for years, had already scheduled for the following Thursday at her office on Rocky River Drive. Kyle and Vanessa had no idea Frank Delgado would be sitting quietly in the small conference room next door, or that two Cleveland police detectives would be parked outside in an unmarked car, waiting on Frank's signal. I spent that week acting exactly the way I had for the past 11 days. Tired, quiet, cooperative, letting Vanessa believe her plan was working exactly as intended. She even hugged me the morning of the meeting and told me she was proud of how strong I was being through all of this. I remember standing there letting her arms wrap around me, thinking about that text message on Richard's laptop, and feeling absolutely nothing but cold, steady patience. We all sat down in Patricia's office at 10 in the morning, Kyle in a gray suit, Vanessa in black, both of them composed, almost relaxed, clearly expecting a simple formality before they collected what they believed was already theirs. Patricia went through the standard opening of the will reading, and then, right on cue, she looked at me and asked if there was anything I wanted to add before continuing. "Actually, yes," I said, and I watched Kyle's face shift just slightly, the first flicker of unease. "Before we go any further, I think it's time everyone in this room saw what your mother left behind." I nodded toward the door, and Richard Halloway walked in carrying his laptop, followed by Frank Delgado, whose face Kyle clearly recognized from somewhere years back. Maybe an old traffic stop, maybe just instinct, because the color drained out of his son's face immediately. Vanessa's voice came out sharp. "What is this? Harold, what's going on?" I looked at her steadily and said, "Diane's exactly what's going on." Richard set the laptop on the conference table and played the kitchen footage without a word of introduction. Vanessa's own voice filled that small office, clear as day, talking about the account being fully transferred, about not needing the power of attorney anymore, and then Kyle's voice answering back, warning her not to get sloppy like she had with Mom. The room went dead silent except for that recording playing out loud, every word of it landing like a hammer. Vanessa's face went white, then red, and she stood up so fast her chair scraped hard against the floor. That's not what it sounds like. That's taken out of context." "Sit down," Frank Delgado said calmly, showing his credentials for the first time. "There are two detectives outside this office right now, and everything you say from this point forward can be used against you. Financial exploitation of an elder, forgery, and pending toxicology results from an exhumation request already filed with the coroner's office regarding Diane Doyle's cause of death." Kyle hadn't said a single word yet. He just sat there staring at the table, and I watched something break in my son's face. Not innocence, because that was long gone, but the specific look of a man who finally understood there was nowhere left to run. "Dad," he said, voice cracking, "I never wanted her to actually die, I swear. It was just supposed to slow her down, keep her confused enough that she wouldn't fight the paperwork." I felt Richard's hand land on my shoulder, steady, grounding me, because for 1 second the room tilted, and all I could see was Diane in that hospital bed I never got to reach in time. But I didn't yell. I didn't need to. "Your mother sat in that kitchen every single Sunday for 30 years making sure you had a full plate before she filled her own," I said quietly, "and you sat across from her counting down how long until you got the house." The detectives came in 2 minutes later. Vanessa cried the whole way out. Kyle didn't say another word. It's been almost 8 months now since that day in Patricia Nguyen's office. Kyle pled guilty to financial exploitation of an elder and forgery, and is currently serving a 4-year sentence at Grafton Correctional. Vanessa's case went further. The exhumation and toxicology report confirmed dangerously elevated levels of a heart medication in Diane's system, far beyond what any doctor had prescribed her, and Vanessa was convicted of involuntary manslaughter alongside the financial charges. She's looking at 11 years. Danny, it turned out, was Vanessa's cousin, a pharmacy technician who'd been quietly diverting the medication and is now facing his own separate charges. I still live in the house on Maple Heights Boulevard. Some mornings it's quiet in a way that used to hurt, and now mostly it just feels honest. I got the retirement money back, every dollar of it, through the court, though honestly the money was never really the point. Richard Halloway and I have become genuinely close friends since all of this, something neither of us expected, and he tells me now that Diane used to talk about me at the office more than I ever knew, always proud, always certain I'd do right by her if it ever came to that. I set up a small scholarship fund in Diane's name through the cardiac care unit at Metro Health, for families who can't afford the follow-up care that might have caught what was happening to her sooner. It's not much yet, but it's growing, and every dollar in it carries her name forward doing something good, which is exactly the kind of thing she would have wanted. I think about that hallway outside the funeral home a lot, Richard's voice shaking on the phone, telling me to come see something before it was too late to matter. My wife protected me one last time.